In Hilchis Maaseh HaKorbanos, the Rambam rules that if a person took a vow to bring a bigger carbon and instead he brought a smaller carbon, he's not Yoitze. On the other hand, if he made a vow to bring a smaller one and then he brings a bigger one, he is Yoitze. The Rambam gives examples. If a person said he's going to bring a lamb and instead he brings a ram, or if he said that he's going to bring a calf, instead he brings an ox, if he said he's going to bring a kid, a young goat, and instead he brings an older goat, he is Yoitze. Now the source for this Rambam is a Mishnah in Masechta Menachos, where it says if a person vowed to bring a bigger one, he brought a smaller one, he's not Yoitze. If he made a vow to bring a smaller one and he brought a bigger one, we have a machloikas. According to the Chachamim, he is Yoitze. According to Rebbe, he is not Yoitze. And clearly the Rambam rules like the Chachamim. The question, however, is how is it possible to be Yoitze with the ram if he said a lamb? The pasuk says, "Moitzas vasecha tishmoir v'asisa kasher nodarto." You need to observe what you have verbalized, and you need to do what you have vowed. So if he said a smaller one and he brought a bigger one, seemingly he didn't do according to what he had vowed. Now, seemingly, you can explain this in two different ways. One way from the perspective, we're dealing with the person, the gavra, about his oath. Another one is looking at the object of the oath. As far as the person is concerned, we might say that when he said he's vowing to bring a smaller one, what he really meant was the minimum. And therefore, if he brings something bigger than what he had promised, he has fulfilled his vow because he included that as well. Another way of understanding it is because of the object of the vow. Similar to the idea that we say that included in a bigger amount, Mosayim included in 200, there will be 100. In a similar way over here, we could say that yes, he perhaps did have in mind the smaller one, but when he brings the bigger one, the smaller amount, the smaller one is included in that, and therefore it's as if he brought the smaller one as well. But the Rebbe says it's difficult to say either of these explanations for a number of reasons. First of all, says the Rebbe, we find a similar machloikas to this in another Mishnah in Masechta Menachos. There it's dealing with a person who made a promise, a vow, to bring a mincha, which is a flour offering. Usually the maximum of that is 60 isroinos. Isroin is a certain amount, 60 isroinos. Now, this person says, I made a vow to bring a certain amount of isroinos, but I don't know how many I promised. So we have a machloikas what he needs to do. Rebbe says he needs to bring one isroin, and then he needs to bring a mincha with a second isroin, with 2 isroinos, He needs to bring a mincha of 3 isroinos, all the way up until 60. The Chachamim, on the other hand, say, no, we can bring one mincha of 60 isroinos, and that's all taken care of. What is the reason for this machloikas? Rav Ashi explains that the reason of the machloikas is the same machloikas we had earlier. Rebbe is of the opinion that if you promise to bring something small, and you bring a bigger one, you're not Yoitze. So it's not going to help you bringing 60 Yisroinos if you only vow to bring 1 or 2. And therefore, he says you need to bring a bunch of separate menachos, and with one of them, you're going to be Yoitze. The Chachamim, on the other hand, hold that if you promise to bring a small one and you brought a bigger one, you are Yoitze in a similar way over here. Yes, you may have made a smaller promise, but by bringing 60, which is the maximum, that automatically includes the smaller amount. You definitely had it there. Now, the Gemara asks in that particular case, why do we need to say 2 separate machloikasin? One in the case of the menachos of the flour offerings, telling us the same idea, the machloikas of when you vow to bring a smaller one and you brought a bigger one. Seemingly, it's the same machloikas. So the Gemara says that no, we need to hear about the machloikas in both places, because had I only said one, I wouldn't have automatically assumed that the machloikas applies in the other case as well. The Gemara says, if we would say the machloikas only in regards to the flour offerings, we would have said the following. Only over here do the Chachamim say that he is Yoitze by bringing the bigger amount of flour, because the bottom line is, no matter how many Yisroinis of flours the person is bringing to the mincha, the amount that will be brought on the Mizbeach is always going to be the same. It's only one handful of flour that's brought on the Mizbeach. And therefore, here they say, you're Yoitze. But with the karbonis, the bigger one and the smaller one, and a bigger carbon, you're actually going to be bringing more on the Mizbeach than in the smaller carbon. And therefore you might say, no, this is not what he promised to bring. And therefore, perhaps they would agree to Rebbe by those bigger animals that he's not Yaitza. The Gemara then also discusses why we couldn't have said the Machloikas only in the case of the animals. We're not going to go into it right here. But bottom line, what we see over here is that logic on its own dictates that if there's more things being brought on the Mizbeach, you would think he's not Yaitza because that's not what he said. And we don't say this logic, well, the bigger amount includes a smaller amount anyways. And therefore it's difficult to say that according to the end result in the Gemara, the whole reason, or the Chiddush of the Chachamim is, because the bigger amount contains the smaller amount, that's why he's Yaitza. Because clearly here we see the logic going the other way around. The Gemara is assuming that the Chachamim would hold on its own. That the Chachamim would hold that no, if he promised a bigger amount, it shouldn't automatically include the smaller amount. That's why it's a chiddush to say. Nevertheless, the Chachamim do argue there as well and say that he would be Yaitza in the case of the animals. The Rebbe says it's also difficult to say that the whole chiddush or the svara of the Chachamim in the din of if you promised a smaller one and you brought a bigger one is because of the person that probably had in mind the minimum, but he really meant more. Because again, practically, you have to look what he said, and he didn't say that. He said he's bringing the smaller one. So how can he be Yaitza with the bigger one? Another problem, says the Rebbe. If the reason is either because of the person that he only limited himself to the minimum, or because of the object that the bigger amount automatically includes the smaller amount, then the halacha should have been that even lechatchila, you should be able to bring bigger than what you promised. We know that a person should always try to give the best to Hashem. If that's the case, on the contrary, bigger is better. But from the simple reading of the Rambam, it seems like it's only b'di'evid. So from all of this, it seems to be implying that when you promised the smaller one, you clearly did not have in mind the bigger one. And as far as the object, the bigger one, you can't just say it includes the smaller one. And therefore, we're back to square one. What is the reason that if you promised a small one and you brought a bigger one, you're Yaitza? In order to explain this, the Rebbe says we're going to have a look at something else. In the caption of the Rambam for Hilchos Nedarim, he says, "Sheyishmor moitzos fasav." You need to observe what you have promised with said with your mouth, and you should do v'yasek moishanadar and do what you have vowed. Now, seems to be a little bit of extra language over here. Seems to be a bit redundant, even though it seems to be based on the pasuk that says these 2 points: moitzos vasecha tishmor v'asiso kasher nadarta. But why is this extra expression in the Rambam needed if there's no practical difference in halacha? And the Rebbe says it makes sense to say that there's actually 2 things over here. One idea is that you need to be careful to do exactly what you said with your mouth. The other one is to do what you vowed, which means that in every neder there's actually 2 aspects. The words that you said, moitzos vasech, you need to guard, observe the words that you said. And there is the content, the theme, the essence of what you were saying, the spirit of what you were saying. And that's what it means, v'asiso kasher nadarta, you should do according to your vow. And here is where the machloikas of Rebbe and the Rabbanan come in. According to Rebbe, the most important things is the word you said. We only care about practically which words you said. And therefore, if you said keves, you said a lamb, and you brought an ayil, a ram, you're not Yaitza. According to the Rabbanan, the main thing is to fulfill the essence or the spirit behind your neder, even if it doesn't fit exactly with the words that you said. And therefore, if you said keves, if you said a lamb, and really, when we say keves, we know that generally a neder you're supposed to be giving from the very, very best. But keves is a younger sheep. So what we're assuming is the content behind your neder was, do you want to bring something from the species, from the type called tzoyin, called sheep? You said the smaller one, the lamb, that's because of a side issue that you couldn't afford anything more. So you said a keves, but really you just meant generally the sheep. And therefore, even though, yes, lechatchila, you should bring the lamb, because there's the concept that you should follow exactly what you said. But nevertheless, if you brought the bigger one of that kind, which is the ram, you are still yaitza, because you fulfilled the v'yasisa kasher nadarta, the spirit behind the neder, which was really about bringing something from sheep. The Rebbe says this will be even more geschmack, based on the following. Regarding a mitzvah, that the fact that a yid has a mitzvah to fulfill the neder that he made, we have two types of nidarim. One is called nidre isur, when the person is taking a certain thing that was mutter and he's making it forbidden for himself. He said, this is going to be usur to me. Nidre hektish is when he's promising something to Hashem. Now, regarding these two ideas, the Rambam brings two psukim. The pasuk says, "Moitzas vasecha tishmer v'yosisa kasher nodata," which is the pasuk that we've been dealing with. This is the pasuk that's speaking about bringing karbonis, etc. And then there's the pasuk "Kechol hayotzim mipiv whatever you let out from your mouth, you should do, which is a pasuk speaking about prohibitions that you take on yourself. Now, by a prohibition that you take on yourself, the whole prohibition only became of what you have verbalized, and therefore the pasuk only says one thing. Make sure you do exactly what you let out of your mouth. In other words, the most important thing is the words that you said. But by nidarim of hektish, of a carbon, etc., what's actually happening through your speech is that a certain reality of Torah, the idea of a carbon, is now applying to you or to this animal. That means there's a reality, and your dibur is only causing that it should now apply. And therefore, in this pasuk, it doesn't only say, stick to the words that you said. It also says, v'yosisa kasher nodarta. Because as we said before, that you could be fulfilling the neder, even if it's not in the exact words that you said, as long as the theme of the neder is there. And now the Rebbe looks at it, the Rebbe says, we know the idea of karbonis is also from the word of kiruv, becoming close. Adam kiyakriv mikem carbon means that a yid is becoming close to Hashem. A carbon means he wants to become completely dedicated to Hashem. That's what the idea of a carbon is. So we say, hanoider katan, if you vowed katan and brought a big one, your yoitza, meaning to say, even if you start with something small in the beginning of your avodah, maybe only giving part of yourself. But since the theme, the idea, the life behind the neder is really a general idea that you want to give yourself over completely to Hashem, therefore, even if right now you're starting with something small, but really in essence it's connected to giving yourself completely over to Hashem. And ultimately you will bring that also in a revealed way. And with every part of you, you'll be close to Hashem. And the Rebbe concludes that being involved in the laws of karbonis will be zoichet to the binyan beis hamikdash hashlishi bevias Mashiach tzadkeinu, where we'll do all the mitzvahs in the most perfect way, b'meheira v'yameinu mamash.